and welcome back to the Agronomists. I bet you guys that hopped on early are surprised. You guys either thought you were getting Lyndsey Smith or Sean Haney. Joke's on you. You get me, Kara Oosterhuis, tonight to talk all things irrigation management. So I am super excited to be the host here tonight. Bear with me as we make it through this, but I am, like I said, very excited and always very happy to have you guys all here. I see the whole crew is already here. Farmer Schneck, Ray Dalbanco, John Bosch. Thank you guys all for tuning in. I see your comments. Hope things are going well. John, I see you're talking. You still can't get any rain, so hoping the rain falls there soon for you. We are here today to talk artificial rain, as I said. But before in today's guests here, I want to thank our sponsors because, of course, we would not be able to do this without our sponsors. So tonight's show sponsors are the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, ADAMA Canada, and as well the members only webinar, which we are hosting tomorrow through Real Agriculture at 3 p.m. Eastern. So ADAMA Canada, while other sources of innovation run dry, ADAMA is here to deliver, leveraging the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative crop protection solutions to your greatest challenges. We're all in on you. Talk to your ADAMA sales rep today. Thank you very much, like I said, to ADAMA Canada and the other two sponsors to bring this wonderful show of the Agronomists. Anyways, you guys are here to hear from our guests, not me rambling on. Today's guests here are Catherine Kerkhoff. She is with Hytech Production, and Len Hingley, who's with Alberta Agriculture, Forestry, and Rural Economic Development. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having us, Kara.
Absolutely. So, as I said, we're here to talk irrigation. Now, we're all kind of from the irrigation neck of the woods, the area where we're very familiar with irrigation, but I know for a fact there's some people tuning in today that aren't as familiar. What are some of the different methods of irrigation? Len, maybe you want to start off there?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of slides here that I sent that might be beneficial, but there are three different methods of irrigation, and we can specifically talk about those irrigation scheduling methods. The first is a plant-based methods, and those are more indirect measurements of soil moisture. The one image that you can maybe see on the left there has a plant stem, and that's called the sap flow sensor. And what it does is provides a heat element to the stem, and what the change in that heat as sap flows through it is able to tell us how much the plant is transpiring. Next to that, the one in the blue above it is called an IRT, and again, both of those sensors are made by Dynamax. The IRT is an infrared thermometer, and we can put it on a pivot, and we have done that in the past. And what we've done is we've run the pivot around to look at the crop temperature. Basically, that tells you what kind of temperature the crop is. And we have an idea of using what's called a crop water stress index, as well as a degree above stressed index. And it gives you a plant stress model. And that gives you an idea of basically where's the target plant temperature that I'm looking for to give me optimum growth. The one below that is called a microwave sensor, and that's by Skauhaus Sensing. That gives you an idea of the soil, volumetric soil water content based on emissivity of the soil. So if I have more soil water, then the emissivity is lower than it would be if it was drier. So higher emissivity levels, the higher the stress of the crop. And then another one on the bottom right there is from EMS, and that again is another sap flow sensor that's punctured a tree, and it gives you an idea of just the sap flow coming through that tree. So these are indirect measurements of our irrigation scheduling methods. And so another one is called the soil-based method, and that'll be on the next slide. The soil-based methods, we have a number of different sensors that we use for them. The most crude, of course, is your shovel, where we dig into the soil and we have an idea of what the soil moisture looks like there. And then second to that would be an auger, and this is a push probe you see on the top right-hand side. Below that one, we have a tensiometer. A tensiometer, basically what we have is we have water in the tube above a ceramic cap, and then we put it into the soil, and that suction that goes through that ceramic cap is measured with that little dial on the right-hand side, and then we're able to tell the kind of tension in the soil and how dry that soil is. Below that, we have some wireless soil moisture sensors, including the one on the far left, which is a DACOM sensor. It has a little solar panel at the top. It's battery operated. It's a capacitance probe. Basically, it gives you wireless soil moisture data at any point in time. In the middle, bottom right, we have a neutron probe, and that's kind of the standard for irrigation research. And basically, we have fast thermalizing neutrons that are sent into the soil, and those neutrons, again, are thermalized by the hydrogen in the soil, and the highest hydrogen content that we do have in the soil is in the form of water, H2O. And then lastly, is a PR2, and that's a capacitance probe. So I think I've gone through all of them here. Oh, no, the ones above, there's a granular matrix sensor, and so that was the last of those. Yeah,
Now,
next slide. Sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
no, I was just going to say, as somebody who grew up on an irrigation farm, I can tell you that those push probes look a lot nicer than the Dutch augers that many of us use with our big, strong arms that aren't so big and strong. So, yeah, no, definitely. Now, we can get back to those other slides after. However,
Sure.
Catherine, you do a lot of work with, obviously, you're an agronomist, but you see a lot of different crops. What's the most common one you see under irrigation?
Guys are starting to get more into the precision moisture probes just because they're more curious than anything. But honestly, the Dutch auger is still the favorite. I have to say that's the one I push the most. The guys that are looking at more direct seeding are using the shovel. I mean, they know their soil. They can tell when they're walking on it. Yeah, it's squishy. This is perfect, right? But at the end of the day, the Dutch auger is still, I think, one of the most popular.
So, do you want to talk a bit about why you would maybe want to get that soil core though, and why there's sometimes you don't just want to pull soil up from the surface. You want to know what's, maybe half a meter down?
Yeah, so I find guys have been using the shovel for years, and it works. It works when they know their soil, but how many times, like last year, you look at the soil when it was so dry. Um, just how dry is it though? How deep are those roots going? Because that's the thing, is you see in the wheat how far your roots are going. On a wet year, you're going to see that the roots are only traveling like that top soil surface. So really, we need to fill that root zone so our roots go down, right? So it's important that we know A, where the roots are, and B, where the moisture's sitting, because maybe we have that bottom soil zone. Maybe we've got more potential than we realize even, right? Maybe it's not as dry as we thought in the first place. And maybe it's drier than we thought in the first place. I don't know how many times I've pulled up cores or told guys, you know what, we need to irrigate. The soil's got room for 2 inches. And they'll be like, I just watered it.
Mm-hmm.
That top 6 inches, the top 12 inches look great. I'm like, yeah, but down below. And we know how quickly, like last year, how quickly we used up that soil moisture. So I think it's important to probe all the way down and in more than one location, because we know how much that soil changes, right? That texture. So.
Yeah, so maybe you guys both want to touch a bit on this, but do you want to talk about the soil textures and what are kind of the basic soil textures out there, and why it's kind of important that when it comes to irrigation management, we're paying attention to our soil textures?
I'll let Len take that one on.
Sure. Actually, to parrot some of the things that Catherine was talking about, absolutely. I think the most often used instrument for soil moisture identification would have to be a Dutch auger or a shovel. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that you have to use any of these other methods, because you're out there in your field and you know it. As long as you're out there doing it, it doesn't matter what kind of system you're using to manage these your crop, right? Or specifically irrigation management. So I'm with her on that for sure. That most of the people that I work with directly work with the pros themselves. With regards to texture, texture is critical in the sense that if without knowledge of the texture on your farm, you're not going to know how much to apply, how much water to apply in the end. You just don't. And there's three different things that we talk about specifically as irrigation managers: is the rate, amount, and timing. So the RAT of irrigation management. So rate is the amount of water you can apply at or above your irrigation threshold. Okay. And then your amount is how much will your water or your field hold based on the texture that you have. And timing is really, when do my plants need water, and when is that reservoir going to deplete to a point where I need to put more water down? So those are the three, and texture is critical to that. So our textures vary quite a bit. So we have our clays or our fine textured soils on the one end, and then we have our coarse textured or sandy soils on the other side. And so, and then there's the mixture in between, right? But the three main particles that make up any soil texture are your clay particles, then your silt, and then your sand, which are your largest particles. So those are the three that kind of interplay with one another, and then they basically, dependent on how those balance in your soil, determines how much water you can hold, but it also determines your infiltration rates as well. And I have a couple of slides on that later on I can talk to you about, but I'd like to let Catherine talk a little bit about this too. So go ahead, Catherine.
Well, I was going to say with the textures, like I used to get real hung up and like want to take every sample to the lab and every spot in the field to the lab. But now I basically, after doing it for so long, it's kind of an experience thing, I think, at the end of the day, to talk with a farmer and I find out, how heavy is the soil? How light is the soil? Do you have spots that run off more? Do you have spots that really can take in the 3 inches if you need it, right? So I think it's understanding what your soil will do, not necessarily getting hung up on exactly what percentage sand, silt, clay you've got in the soil, but still understanding that there is sand, silt, and clay and where that is in your soil. Like if you've got clay down at the bottom, you know that eventually it fills up. But if you've got sand down at the bottom, you got to irrigate it differently according to that texture. So it's good to know your soil. But yeah, like I said, I used to get hung up on taking it maybe to the lab, but just understand your soil, kind of work with it, right?
Absolutely. And when you're going out to a field for the first time, Catherine, like you said, it's experience. But if you're establishing a field for the first time, how many different samples will you kind of take from a field? Because, I mean, as we know, there can be a sand in one corner and a clay in the other. How do you kind of determine where that happy medium might be?
I found over the years the best way to do it is to talk to the grower. I say, okay, like you want me to do this service, so tell me what are the best and worst parts of your field, and then so you go check the low spots, the high spots, and then an average spot, right? So you get at least 3, if not more. Now you'll kind of see as the year goes on that you've got to check different areas where it might lodge, where there's not crop growing. So you'll kind of see those different zones. And I think it's important to follow maybe one area, but also throughout the year, check those other areas that you haven't checked yet, because you might be missing a big spot that you didn't notice before, right? So I'd say on a 65-acre field, you do at least 3 or 4, if not more. But check those 3 or 4, get to know that soil, but definitely talk to the grower and figure out what their experience with that soil is. Do you have a spot that runs off all the time? Things like that.
Now, you go out, you get the Dutch auger, and as you've seen there, Lyndsey commented she didn't even know it was called the Dutch auger. Yes, she probably thought I was making it up. She's like, Kara, I get it, you're Dutch, you're making up this. No, it's a real thing. It's got the 2 arms, and you push it around, and yeah, it's a lot of fun, especially in a drought year. Sometimes you end up on the back of the quad pushing it down. I have had to before, because when you're only so tall, it doesn't always work so well. But anyways, you're pulling the core, and what's kind of next? You guys want to talk me through what what a hand feel could look like, and how you kind of determine what the moisture level is? Len, me.
Sure.
I basically, I'll just do a quick one here, Len, and then you can have it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Basically, you take that hand core, and I always relate it to a sponge. So I always tell a guy that's new, or if I'm trying to teach somebody what I'm looking at, I relate it to a sponge. How full, how much more moisture can we put in that sponge? Do you think we can put, and I always go to general terms, like Len's got better terminology than I do, but I go pretty basic with just how full can we fill that sponge? Are we gonna like be able to double this amount, or can we only lightly top it up? And if we're like starving for moisture in that sponge, then we know it's about 50%, right? Any lower than 50%, we know it's not good. It's going to be falling out of our hands. If our hands are getting muddy, we know it's 100%. Everybody knows what 100% soil looks like, right? Saturated soil, you're playing in mud. So now trying to find that medium is really just getting a good feel for it. Can you make the ball? And that's where you go to Len's slides. And I think he's got the different textures or the different percentages. If not, it's in the irrigation management field book. You get those different percentages based on the different textures, and if it makes a ball, or yes, that's the one. It's not so simple that you make a ball or you ribbon it. There's your percentages, right? 75%. So start with those basics, and you kind of just get a feel for it over time.
Absolutely. Len, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily. And we talked about this before, but the precision of getting, okay, I need to be within 5%. And Dave Highland, who you've worked with in the past, Kara, he'd always get down, oh, that's about 2% difference than what we suggested, right? And I was like, Dave, come on, we're splitting hairs here. But he was so good at it, and he had so much experience at it. He could tell within a couple of percentage points. But really, if you have it within 25%, you're doing a pretty good job. So don't be discouraged. That's the one thing I wanted your listeners to take home is that don't be discouraged. Look at those bigger parcels. So those 25% increments, and if you can look at it like that, then you don't have as much stress on your farm. And you want to kind of target that 75 to 100%. If you dry down to maybe 50% or something like that, then you're putting your crop into stress too, right? So you don't want to be going there. Yeah, I guess that was the one thing that I did want to mention about hand texturing. Another thing, when you do get out and you're doing hand texturing and you have different textures out there, if it balls up and it leaves a stain on your hand, and you can actually see the stain itself, you're around 75% to 70%. That's where you want. Over that, anything, and if it stains, and if you actually can push some liquid out of your hand between your fingers, then you know you're at around 95 to 100%. Okay, but that stain that stains your palm when you're holding that soil and you're making it into a ball, that's kind of where the target is. Anything below that is just crumbling and drying. You're below that target level, and you're going to need water pretty quickly. So those are the keys that I would leave with your listeners.
There was definitely cores I pulled up last year in, as you guys know, I am Southern Alberta, and I was in the drought zone, and there was cores we pulled up last year, and they just crumbled out. It's when it won't even stick in the auger, and that's with a little bit of irrigation. You just couldn't keep up. So absolutely, I see where you're going. Before,
okay,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I've done some irrigation management past with some producers, and there was newly broken land, and below 50 centimeters it was powder dry, so there was nothing. So early on in the season, if you run into something like that, irrigate as much as you can to get water down to depth. And I know Catherine mentioned that earlier on here. That's when you do it, as earlier on, or you do it in your fall when you're replenishing whatever you've lost. But push that water down and make sure that you can get it down, because you're never going to get it at peak water use times during July and August. You can't push water down below 50 centimeters. So that's another key.
Okay, now I wanted to talk a bit about some of the research you've done, but first I am going to actually show a clip here. We have a clip from one of our corn school episodes. Now, I believe for our producer here, it is a clip one, I believe, and it's a corn school episode with Bern Tobin based on a farmer in Ontario that kind of looked at some of the subsurface technology he has looked at with drip irrigation. So, Sean, if we could show that clip, that would be terrific. And right before we do that, I'm going to thank our sponsors. Thank you to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, ADAMA Canada, as well as the members only webinar that will be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Mountain. So please, if you are not a member, go sign up on realagriculture.com. It is free. It is fun. We have a lot of informative things going on over there. So go check it out. But thank you very much to our sponsors. And whenever we have that clip ready, that would be a great kickoff point.
And irrigation in an area.
2012, we suffered a total crop loss, so that forced us to look to a irrigation alternative, which we've been researching. So we in-house on the farm, we decided we were going to put the system in ourselves. Like I said before, we built the applicator, we put the tape in on 14 inches deep, every 44 inches, and we broke it into the farm into 6 zones. Going ahead, I'm very comfortable with the topic of drip irrigation now. It's been a learning curve for the last 4 years, but the last 3 years after 2012, I've reached my target of 75 additional bushels per acre, even though we've had planter issues and some different years in there, weather years. And then this year, entering this year, I had the last 3 years, I had an average of about 245 bushel. Going into this year, I started off really well in May, and I was pretty happy. We went to precision planting. My fields are in good shape. And then we have a definite lack of rainfall. 2016 has been a repeat, if not maybe a little bit worse conditions in our area of just like 2012. We've suffered a drought right from planting time right on through. But I'm very happy.
Okay.
I took everybody on a good tour of the farm. I look at the farm and I'm happy every time I go up there. Dryland corn around me in the Lassalette area. I see there's been farms that have already had the okay to be removed and put the cover crop in. And when you look at my crop up there, it's not the prettiest crop I've ever had, but I'm at a yield estimate at 180 with some test weight. I'm going to make 200 bushel. I looked at that year. I've had the last 3 years. I've been able to put 75 bushel to the acre at least towards my paying my system down. And this year, I go into this year and look up there, and I know that because of the drought and me having my subsurface drip, I'm paying off at least half of my initial capital.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because you basically said you put this in yourself, did a lot of work yourself, at $1,400 per acre, right? So let's do a little bit of the math, and you were doing that for us earlier on. And you figure you've got about half of that paid for at this stage 4 years later, and you're looking to pay it off when?
Well, and this year I've always said it's like insurance. When you have a drought year, that's going to excel and it's going to pay itself right. Like I have 180 bushel that goes straight towards my bottom line because everybody says I carry crop insurance. We have multiple farms in different geographical and different soil types. My crop insurance is one crop insurance. So like 2012, if I had to write that farm off or suffer, I don't recoup that because my crop insurance is all one.
Right. So you got it. So and you're looking to get about 20 years out of the system, right?
Very easily.
So you're going to take that payment that you've been making over the last 4 years, put it in your pocket down the road.
And being a livestock farmer, I like to guarantee of marketable bushels that are quality bushels. I have a good test weight, and when that goes to the feed trade, I feel good.
Let's talk about what else you've learned. Fertigation, opportunity to run some fertilizer out here, put those inputs where they need to be. You're using a little bit, 28%, right?
I'm correct. I like to think of myself as a little bit better of a farmer because I have my intensive management. It's taught me intensive corn management, so I know the stages when I should be, inserting when the corn needs extra nitrogen, and we've always talked about this pre-tossal boost of nitrogen that everybody's, and I've been doing that as we go, and it's very easy to do through the drip because it's just a matter of recordable and measurable. We can put the fertigation with it.
So so when are you running it, for example? Just pre-tassel, or?
Yep, we later on in mid stage in July, and when it's getting ready to toss. I just put in three gallons to the acre of 28%,
right?
Which is almost like 10 pounds, close to 10 pounds.
10 pounds? Yeah. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. And there's lots of room. Maybe in 4 years from now we'll sit here and maybe I'll learn more about fertigation. I focused on crop management, planting, getting everything in place, and now I got to work on doing that fertigation part.
Of course, if you are looking to see that full episode, go to cornschool.com, or you can listen to any of our agronomy schools by checking out realagriculture.com, as well as download them wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to check out that. Now, Len, I know you have done some research with subsurface drip irrigation. Is it similar to, I know this clip was from Ontario, is some of the work you've done similar to that? Or in what case does it differ?
The work that I've done in the past was focused specifically on irrigation management of alfalfa seed. And the reason we went to drip irrigation is that alfalfa seed, if anybody's grown alfalfa seed, knows that they have leafcutter bees. And these leafcutter bees, the environment that they live in, they don't like to have rain on them, or so they either drown out or the rain interferes with their productivity. And so we decided, okay, well, how do we eliminate that? Well, we put water underground. And so we put some subsurface drip irrigation in. And that's another piece to this whole thing is when we do have subsurface drip, specifically for alfalfa seed, what we do with alfalfa seed is we want to stress the crop. So with the crop that he's talking about, he wants to optimize yield, right? So his vegetative growth would be optimized. Doesn't mean that the irrigation management piece for subsurface drip would be any different. It just means that he's optimizing where we're trying to stress the crop a little bit. But we did have some key learnings. One specifically is your spacing. So depending on your texture, you need your spacing a little tighter for coarser textured soil than you would for finer textured soil. So you get some within soils, and we did talk about texture. So those fine textured soils, the silts and the clays, they have very tight pore spaces, and that allows them to laterally move water a little bit further specifically than a sandy soil that doesn't have those tight pore spaces. And so with a sandy soil, the water is applied and then it drops down immediately. With a coarse, a fine textured soil, it moves out laterally before it moving down. And so then you can put a wider spacing, a tape spacing in. So when we did ours, we did it at about 40-inch spacing because we had about a loam textured soil. And then we set it up at about 12 inches deep. And so that's how deep we put our tape in. And yeah, it seemed to work really well. We were really happy with the soil itself. It seemed lighter. Again, we didn't have too many problems with germination because we did have sprinkler initially, and we did apply that way. And I know gentlemen have talked about it in the past. Some of the hesitation about putting drip tape in is because they thought their germination would be poor. And most of the guys I've talked to haven't had that issue. So but that's just a handful, and I don't know any research on that. So yeah, I could talk to you about my treatments, but I don't know if we want to get into that specifically. So
Sure, you could elaborate, sure.
Okay, so when we did the work, so we were working on again alfalfa seed. We had 5 different treatments. One was full irrigation, one was no irrigation, one was full irrigation to June 30th or bee release, and then no irrigation for the rest of the season. One was 50% of ET replacement for the full season, and then one was full irrigation all the way to June 30th and then 50% of ET replacement. So when I say full irrigation, I mean 100% of ET replacement. So whatever that crop needed, it was given to it. And then 50% of that was 50% of the ET replacement. And the best trial that we had was our 50% of ET replacement for the full growing season for alfalfa seed producers. And one that was second best was full irrigation and then no irrigation after June the 30th. So we irrigated up to bee release and then we shut off all water.
Now,
so those are the two. Yeah, go ahead.
For those that don't talk irrigation every day, do you want to step back a second and talk about ET and what specifically that means?
Sure, yeah, I can get into ET. ET basically is evaporation and transpiration. So evaporation from our soil surface, our land surface and water surfaces. And then transpiration is just basically what our crop transpires into the atmosphere through its stomates. So the underside of most plant leaves, we're going to see stomates. And these stomates open and they allow CO2 in, and they open and release water vapor to cool the plant, basically, is what they're used for. So when we're looking at ET, we're looking at exactly what the crop is using. So whatever's not being transpired is being evaporated into the atmosphere, and we look at any specific crop. What we want to know is how much that crop is using, and we can tell through whatever's being transpired into the atmosphere, as well as evaporation. Because we can't differentiate the two, we need to measure both of them, and then when we know both of them, we know one of them, where we can figure out our transpiration rates for our crops. So that's what we're looking for. It's basically whatever our crop is using is measured in ET, or evapotranspiration. Okay, does that make sense? Absolutely. What else did you want to know? A follow up there, Kara?
Sorry, that was all I had. Catherine, did you have something to add to that?
Okay.
No, basically that was the one slide that I really wanted to point out, was the ET rates, because that's what I basically plan everything on, and it's really the simplest way to look at irrigation management. If you're confused and not sure what to put down, look at your peak use times for the alfalfa, the corn, the grass. Like, it's all in that highlighted section. It'll tell you based on, it's based on a seeding date, so you might have to fluctuate it a week or two. But you can see that, cereals this time of year, wheat, it shows, we'll be using up to 7.4 mils per day at peak use, which makes perfect sense, right? That's why you can't keep up. But it also tells you how much you can put in that soil. If you put down 7.4 mils per day times by 7, so you got 50 mils, right? So it gives you a good indication what you need to at least be putting in the soil to keep up with it on the hot days. And I basically, this is the one chart I tell growers, like, this is what you need to know at which times, how much you're using. And when you can turn that pivot off and maybe shift it over somewhere else, like, make sure during peak use that pivot is on. And then after that, you can start easing off again, right? So it gives you a good timing wise.
Here's another piece to that. And we talked a little bit about that earlier on, was the effective root zone. So your rooting zone, it varies, right? As your plant matures, your roots grow deeper, and then you have more freedom to or more flexibility with your bucket size or your soil profile. So at the top, you use about 40 centimeters. So based on a quarter, or 25 centimeters, or 25%, I guess it's better to say 25%. So 25% of your rooting depth, 40% of your roots will be there, okay? And then below that, the next 25% will have 30% of your roots. So that top 50% of that root zone has 70% of your roots. And so that's why it's so critical to get that top 50% of your root zone full. And then your bottom will help you a little bit, but it only has 30% that it's drawing from your plants, okay? So that's another critical thing to know.
Now, another thing we kind of mentioned in that video, I was going to switch gears a bit, fertigation. Do you see a lot of it, Catherine? Do you use a lot of fertigation? I know sometimes corn is where we see it a lot more.
Yeah, fertigation is used quite a bit. I mean, the potato industry is using it like crazy. Corn growers, wheat growers have tried it. It really depends on your soil, just where it actually pays off there. And at the end of the day, it comes down to price per acre. You know, if you can make it affordable for you, but for wheat, you can put down a granular 20-pound top up at that 4-leaf stage and it's good enough, right? So I would spend the money on the more expensive crops, or after a hailstorm, sometimes people will add and fertigate then, right? Those are the key times. And if they got a good deal on the liquid, but the dry is really expensive, like the fertilizer market's so funny that way, right? So I still see a lot of it. I think it does have purpose, but I would never rely on it. I never think I think you always want to start with that dry program. Back in the day, it used to be an anhydrous program. And then you're always topping up and supplementing with the liquid program. Yeah, that's kind of where I think that is.
Now, what would some of the benefits be to fertigation if you've never done it on your farm? Maybe your neighbors do it, but of course we have the whole price and the market aspect there. But from the agronomy perspective, what benefits does it bring?
That's like a Ross McKenzie topic, hey?
should
Or
be
maybe
here.
a Ray. There's, from my standpoint, I feel like there is benefits in that it's more available at times. It's more like a top up, though. Yeah, that's a big topic, that fertility side of things. But maybe Len can help me out there.
Only as it relates to fertigation in the subsurface drip area. I would say that's where you probably have your biggest potential gains, because you're injecting fertilizer right to the root zone, right? And so you're talking about plant available. Obviously, it has to be plant available. But when we're broadcasting or we're applying fertigation through a pivot, you have interception of the canopy. So sometimes you lose it to the foliar interception. Does it get where it needs to go? Not necessarily. Whereas with subsurface drip, you can really push yield, I think. We were going to do some research on it previously, but that kind of fell through. So I hope somebody's working on that currently, and I'm sure if we looked into it, we'd find some good research on it now.
Now, another big part of irrigation management, of course, is disease management. We're going to get into this in a minute. I did have a quick clip to show here, so that will be the other clip there. And but before we head into the clip, of course, I have to thank our sponsors, because we would not be here without them. So once again, thank you to Mind Your Farm Business Podcast, ADAMA Canada. I'm going to get it one of these days eventually. And as well, the members only webinar that we are hosting, that Sean Haney is hosting tomorrow on realagriculture.com. So be sure to check that one out. It is at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Mountain, and it is as I said, it's exclusive members only. If you're not a member yet, sign up. It's featuring Carlo Dade and Jude Law of the Canada West Foundation. So be sure to check that one out. Producer, if we can get that clip up, please and thank you, of Kelly Turkington.
And irrigation in an area which is typically dry and an area where the conditions are not normally conducive for Fusarium head blight. Managing your irrigation can be an extremely important strategy to deal with Fusarium graminearum. If you look at trying to limit your irrigation as the crop is coming into head emergence and during that anthesis period, probably for about 7 to 10 days, and even if you can extend it a bit longer, that will produce conditions that are less conducive to the disease. The challenge is meeting the water needs of the crop at the same time. So often you want to probably recharge your water in your soil prior to head emergence, limit the irrigation or stop it altogether, And then couple that with a fungicide application at anthesis and growing a variety that's got a really good level of resistance.
Now, as we know, lots of these canopies, when they get warm, we can get, in the irrigation areas, there's a reason we have irrigation, and it's because we probably wouldn't be able to grow some of the crops we do without having that artificial rain. So you can get so humid in those canopies there that it can breed disease. Catherine, maybe you have some comments there on what you tell growers when it comes to disease management and how important it is to actually pay attention to turning that pivot on and off.
So, I mean, recrop is so different, but when you look at, say, dry beans, and I've worked with a lot of great experienced agronomists when it comes to the dry beans in that Bow Island Tabor area, and the best finds they had were that you fill up that soil, you let it run off, like basically to the point of runoff with the dry beans, and then you let it dry out. And that's the hardest thing for guys because they've got these pivots and they want to run them. Like, it's dry, let's put it on. And I'm like, no, let's let it dry right out. Let that bean soak it up. Let that bean flower. And then we soak it right back up. And it's helped eliminate, well, not eliminate, it helps drop the amount of disease in there, right? So it's really important to know, like, when your peak usage is, and you can fill up that top 2 feet, right? And that's the other thing is when Len talked about the root zone, like that's so key to know that in dry beans, you don't need to fill up all 4 feet. You just need to be dealing with that top 2 feet. And then when you look at things like lentils, which is rarely grown on irrigation, but I know it's been done before and I've worked with it, it's probably one of the hardest things for irrigation guys to grow because they just want to irrigate it. But really, we need to just let it dry. Like, it's a dry land crop. It only needs technically 4 inches of moisture a year. So we water it, we let it flower.
Germinate, though.
What's that?
It does need to germinate, though, and we need rain
for
that.
Yes, it does. No, like, it's great when you can have that option, right? If you need to move water around, you can throw lentils on there, but we can reduce the amount of disease in those lentils by just dropping the amount of moisture we're putting down, right? It will grow quite well if we just let it dry out a bit. Like, I'm not talking 50% moisture all year, but it can definitely handle it a lot better than, say, a wheat crop will. But that's where he was talking about wheat and fusarium head blight, and it's so key at flowering that we shut off that water in wheat, in cereals. Working in fall rye, it's the same thing. We basically want to irrigate that 4 feet, and we can handle, like, the soils can usually handle it, and the crop can too. As long as it's not lodging, I tell the guys, irrigate it. And then right up until flowering, right before that head starts to elongate, let's keep watering it because usually it's hot and dry here. I mean, this year we got a bit of moisture, but we were still running those pivots, and then shut it off for those 7 days. Sometimes it only flowers for like 3 days, but that 7 to 10 day, if we can push it for that time, and wait till we see those dead flowers coming out of that head, right? Those white flowers coming out of all of that head, not just a part of it. We can reduce the fusarium head blight drastically by doing that. Yeah, peas is another one on irrigation. If we do a similar method as the dry beans, irrigate, soak it, let it dry, let that canopy dry out a bit, and then let's soak it again. That method works quite well. I mean, there's so many factors, right? A lot of guys will irrigate in the rain too if they can, just because it's already wet, so we may as well just top it up at that time. But yeah, if you can let those peas dry out, fill that soil zone, and then that disease cycle, like, it helps reduce that disease environment, right, from any mold or anything. It's not going to eliminate it, but it can definitely reduce the amount.
And I mean, can we drive that message home maybe just a little more on the importance of actually keeping that pivot off? Because I know, like you said, we like to, especially when it comes to fusarium head blight, like, it really is key.
Yeah, like, when I start working with growers, they really struggle with me telling them, like, in the wheat, we can literally leave it off. Like, we can turn it off during flowering, and then we can irrigate it fill up that soil zone one more time, and then we can literally shut it off for the season. Unless August is that hot and dry, that crop will have enough with the 4-foot root zone that it'll fill that head. We don't need to keep irrigating. And when it starts lodging, let's, start shutting it off, put down less maybe, but we can shut it off. They can handle quite a bit. And the reference I always use is that dryland guides grow crops, so we'll be okay.
Yeah. And what have you learned in the subsurface area when it comes to disease management?
Well, again, for Fusarium head blight, the pathogens, and again, this is similar to any disease, right? You have the disease triangle, your pathogen, your host, and then your environment, right? And so, what can we manage? Well, the pathogen, obviously, we try to remove it if we had the opportunity. The host, normally our target crops are our target crops, so we're going to keep it there because that's basically what we grow here in southern Alberta. Those crops that are susceptible to Fusarium head blight. So we're going to continue to grow that. So the one thing we can manage a little bit is our environment, and specifically, as Catherine just mentioned, when we apply that, right? Like if we can fill up our profile prior to flowering and you have it pretty close to full, that's why getting water on early is critical. So you get the bottom half of your root zone full, and then going into flowering, then you're just topping up, and then you can hold off, right? But what we found, and it's been specifically for canola, we've had some issues in the past where, okay, if it's a dry year and we're flowering, we need the water. And we've applied water throughout that flowering cycle, and we haven't noticed any disease prevalence, any uptick in disease. And the reason we don't is because of the environment, right? So we're applying water, but it is so dry and the crop is using so much water, we're just not seeing the high incidence of disease. And we do see that here on site when our pathology program, they're looking for disease. And so they're pushing water all the time and they're looking for disease, and they can't get it in a super dry year. So climate is critical in this. And that's one thing we can't control at all. We can't do anything about that. But note that if the climate isn't is one that will allow us to have more disease, then we're going to have it, right? Regardless of what we do. But I agree with Catherine. If we can irrigate early on and then hold off through that flowering period, that's the best thing we can do.
Now, we do have a couple questions coming in here, and some of the questions here say, can you comment on sprinkler choice on pivots? So, I mean, we talk efficiency all the time, right, when it comes to irrigation, and we've seen the movement from, in some places, from the hammers to the drop tubes, and now there's all sorts of different sprinkler packages you can get. Do either of you have comments on that?
Yeah, I can make a few comments. And I don't know if this is related to in-canopy sprinkler applications. So there's a couple of different methods of irrigation that we can do. We can have LIPA, which kind of has a drag sock, so we're dragging the irrigation sprinkler. There's another one called PMDI, which is precision mobile drip, and it has a long drip tube, and then it has emitters spaced every 18 inches or so, and it allows water to just drip out of the hoses. MESA is what we currently have, and that's about 10 feet above the soil surface. And then there's kind of a movement towards in-canopy sprinkling. And so what that is you have your drop tubes probably about 1.5 to 2 feet above the soil surface. And so then during the growing season, we're dragging it through the canopy and we're sprinkling in canopy. And then our efficiencies are improved, right? Because we're not having that canopy interception that we would have with the MESA sprinklers as the water falls down. And so producers are looking to maybe, okay, this is what we're going to do. But if you're asking sprinklers specifically and what type to get and what not to get, the newer sprinklers they're all fairly comparable, whether you're getting Nelson, Senninger, and there's some new players on the market too that I can't remember right off the top of my head, but they're IWAB type of sprinkler, like larger droplet sizes, but they and the reason they have the larger droplet sizes is they don't want that evaporation loss, right? And so that's why we've gone to the larger droplet sizes. Plus, another piece to that is that it's about 6 to 10 psi that you need to operate these sprinklers, which is very, very little. In the past, when we were operating our systems, it was, we were 70 psi with the high pressure sprinklers above the pivot, and now we were down close to 30, and then we have a regulator on there, and now we're down to 15, and now, like I said, 6 to 10. So we really don't need those big pumps that we had in the past, and we don't need to push a lot of pressure through our systems anymore.
And Peter's got that totally answers it. Thank you. Peter's got a follow-up question to that though, and he says, how much loss difference is over the top versus the in canopy? I know I watched Catherine, that sparked her interest to that when you started talking about it is fascinating to think about it being in the canopy, but do you know what the answer to that question is?
So if we're above canopy, so if you think about the main line itself that goes on their pivot, so every foot that I drop down with a drop tube, I'm gaining 1% in efficiency. And currently where we're at, about 10 feet above, we're around 84 to 83% efficient with our systems, 84 maybe 85 the max. So that's as efficient as we're going to get with a MESA type system. When I drop it down in canopy, we're down into the 90 percentile range. So we're gaining an extra 5 to 6% dropping into canopy. And we've noted, depending on the distance between, so currently right now we're 9 feet to 10 feet between those drops with MESA. If we tighten that up, say to 5 feet or so, and then we drop it down into canopy, depending on the sprinkler that you have that works in canopy, we're going to see, we're not going to see in those lateral losses. So we're not going to see that striping in the crop. We're going to see that water is distributed evenly. And that's what we want, right? You might have to make it a little tighter even yet, maybe 2.5 feet, but each system would be a little bit different. So
now
I think that's
I do
where
wonder
I see the biggest
if. Oh, sorry. I think I lost connection there for a second. Catherine, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say the biggest struggles I've seen with the drop tooth was the corn. You can actually see the rings in the soil, which is just what you were talking about, that was adjusting that space between them, right? But I've seen it, like, I've checked moisture in a cornfield and been a row apart, and it was 50% in one row and 90% in the next row, and it was all based on that the sprinklers weren't, they were in the crop, but they weren't able to actually spread out. So we had to, you have to be real careful in a crop like that.
You're absolutely right. And actually, some of the producers I've worked with, what they've done is they've mounted them up. So in season, as the plant is growing, they keep it as is, and then they have developed something that they actually mounted above the crop canopy so that they don't have those types of issues. So you're still getting that interception. Once you start getting interception, canopy interception, you're not going to get the same kind of uniformity anyway, but at least the uniformity is a little bit better than what you were talking about with that striping. Yeah.
That's pretty much exactly where I was going to go. From the farmer perspective, I was like, pivots get stuck. They can be a pain. And then I'm imagining trying to irrigate through a canola canopy. And
Right.
I wonder if if your tube's way down in the canopy, how well that actually pulls through.
That might be difficult. And I would say what they do is they ride up on that. And I know they do. The precision mobile drip that I was talking about, and that is a very narrow line itself. It won't penetrate the canopy. Basically, it just rides up on the canopy. And the same thing with corn. If you're pulling that precision mobile drip through corn, the corn leaves bring it up off. And so those efficiency gains that you thought you initially gained have been lost. So no system's perfect. I want to make sure that's apparent. But there's certain things that we can do to modify it such that you're not losing all the time. You're getting the most benefit of what you have on there. Another one of that precision mobile drip. There was a gentleman that had it on a farm that I know, and he had some issues with coyotes going and chewing his hoses while they're in the ground. And he thought, oh, okay, this isn't going to happen very often. Well, it happened all the time. He finally pulled it off. He said, I'm done dealing with that. So he, because he had so many issues with it, he pulled it off and went back to MISA again. So some guys really swear by that precision mobile drip. Other guys are like, you know what? I'm not even going to deal with the management that goes with it. So.
And that's the trouble with the subsurface too, right? Is between mice
Absolutely.
and gophers. Yeah.
And while we're kind of talking efficiency loss, now a lot of the prairies has seen a lot of wind this year. Is there any? Do you guys have any numbers on what losses? Like, Catherine, do you recommend not irrigating when it's 100 kilometers an hour wind, or do you say, well, we need the water, you got to put it on?
That's. I would love to say, hey guys, hold off. Don't water for the next 2 days. It's going to be 100-kilometer wind, and then please wait for this and that. But between, these guys have got a lot on their plates and trying to move that water around and get it to where it needs to go. I would love to tell them that they should wait, but it's just not an option most of the time. We're just going to be stuck with that loss. And that's where the drop tubes have come in, to help immensely. I remember the days the nozzles being at the top of the pivot. I mean, we had huge losses then in a wind. At least now it's kind of getting to the ground. But half the time those end guns, we may as well shut those suckers off because they're just going onto the road and they're just, upsetting the driver bys. Yeah. I don't know that there's a better way to do it.
And I mean, we could do a whole entire episode just on moving water around for irrigation, and that's a whole nother thing.
Well, the irrigation districts, right? It's not like you can just shut water off all the time, right?
Well, and it's I think it's a misconception if you're not around irrigation too. The whole you can't just turn on water whenever you like, and there's not an endless supply of water either. So we do have a question here that says lots of traveling guns here. How much more efficient would irrigating at night be than during the day? Anyone have thoughts on that? I mean, we look at that with spraying, we look at that with inversion. Does that play into irrigation?
If you're looking at a number, I don't have a number off the top of my head, but yeah, absolutely, you're more efficient at night because of your cooler temperature. You don't have those evaporative losses. You just don't have the incoming solar radiation that you would normally have. You're more efficient irrigating at night, but can guys do that? Here on the farm, no, not really.
It takes 24 hours at least, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we don't, because then you'd have to pause it during the day, and nobody's going to do that. Districts won't even allow you to do that. So, yeah.
Now, looking at the rest of our questions before we run out of time here. What about precision irrigation technology? We're looking at, of course, we're looking at drop tubes, things like that, like we just kind of discussed. However, there's all sorts of tech that's coming with irrigation as well. Anything that's catching either your guys' eyes or what you hope you'd see down the line?
Yeah, there's lots of different tech that's coming out. How to answer that diplomatically? I don't know.
Well, I'll just answer a general answer. Basically, I love the idea, but I have yet to see one that actually functions properly or has people that understand it well enough. You need an agronomist and the guy that owns the pivot, like the guys that set up the pivots to be running it. it's not just as simple as, here's a precision system, make it work. It has to run every year, all year. A section pivot would be a fantastic place for that, but it needs to be kept up. And if they're not kept up, I mean, I had a guy that had a nice, beautiful section pivot, precision machine, but he could only run it at 60% because the company went bankrupt that originally sent it up. So what are you supposed to do? Right? And I find the follow-up, I mean, I don't want to put anybody down. Maybe there is systems that work, but just from what I've seen, they haven't been able to keep up to everyday maintenance in general.
I would say that's the critical point, is that there has to be follow-up. There has to be good customer support. A lot of these, and here's one example, and I'm not going to go into it in too great a depth, but soil moisture sensors. And so we put wireless soil moisture sensors out in the field, and we say, okay, this is telling us that I have 70% or I have adequate irrigation and I need to irrigate. Well, how do you know? Well, you put in the texture. Well, the texture's not right. It's not telling me the right thing. What do you mean it's not telling you the right thing? Well, let me modify that. Well, you can't. You have to put in that right texture. And we're like, well, that's not indicative of the soil moisture I have out in my field. So what good is that, right? That doesn't really help me. And another piece to that is that, okay, I put it out in my field, and if I don't put it in the right texture, my volumetric water content, say the probe is telling me I'm at 75% of available or 40% of volumetric water content, which would be field capacity for some soils, or way over it actually. So let's say it's 30%. And I have a slide on that. So it's a bit of a graph, and it shows field capacity and wilting point. And basically, if I have a sandy textured soil, next one, last one, I think it is. Oh, one more, yeah. Thanks, Sean. Sorry to make you go through all of this. So say I go out in my field, and my soil moisture instrument is telling me that I'm at 20% of available. 20% of water by volume. And I had a sandy loam soil, well, then I'm at field capacity, and that's great. But if I'm at a clay soil, I'm at wilting point. So that's terrible. And the one thing that these soil moisture sensors don't allow us to do often is to change our soil texture such that it matches what we have out in the field. And then we don't really have an idea of what's going on out there, because we don't know what our texture is, but we also don't know what this water by percent volume is, because it does change with texture. And that's so critical to know, is your texture out in your field. But when I have a probe that's telling me one thing and I know my texture is different, then it causes some problems.
Absolutely. And it leads right back to that beginning conversation we had on the importance of soil texture and knowing what is in your field and what you have. So before we wrap up here quick, any last messages either of you would like to send to our listeners or watchers today? Catherine?
I know that my biggest resource is the irrigation management field book. Dave Highland was kind enough to give me a bunch when he retired. So I said, I'll take them all. I love the book. I hand them out all the time. It's those daily usage rates. You keep up to that and follow your root zone. Dig the hole. It takes 5 minutes. And
if you need one, I have one in my office. I have a few actually, so you still need them. I guess to sign off, I would say the first thing you do is you check your soil, check your system. You got to know what your system is applying. So that striping that I was talking about, certain nozzles are going to output differently than others. You need to replace those fairly constant or quickly if there is an issue with them. Check your soil moisture. And then you want to be topping up your soil moisture before you get in season. And then you're monitoring your soil moisture. So you use one of those 3 different methods that I talked about. So soil, plant, or ET, and then irrigate to ET. That's the one thing I would recommend, is if you're going to irrigate to 100% of ET for most crops. Of course, alfalfa seed would be a little different, but most crops you're 100% of ET. So you want to replace what your crop is using. That would be my suggestion.
Well, that is very great information from both of you. Peter Wheat Pea Johnson says, send us all one, Catherine. He would like one of the irrigation booklets. So, Pete, get a hold of Catherine. She'll hook you up. And before I sign off here today, however, I want to remind you guys, you can get your CCA credits for watching this show. So if you've been watching, please go click the button and sign up for your CCA credits. If you go to, I believe it's www.agronomists.com or realagriculture.com/agronomists, I believe. Yes, that's the correct one. Thank you very much for tuning in. Go check those out. And next week, Lyndsey Smith will be back here in the host seat. So thanks for bearing with Sean and I tonight. We appreciate it very much. It's always fun to be able to talk about irrigation, talk about some of these fun specific topics whenever we can. And of course, I would not sponsors. So thank you very much to our sponsors tonight, ADAMA Canada, the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, and the Real Ag members only show, which will be tomorrow. Listening at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Mountain. Sean will have a great conversation with of the Canada West Foundation. So, yes, John said it right. Good night, all.